Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Wednesday, June 26th. Today is day 264. Today in Washington, D.C., Jake Sullivan and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met. There was a readout from the White House where Mr. Sullivan reaffirmed the U.S.'s ironclad commitment to Israel's security, including in the face of threats from Iranian-backed terrorist groups such as Hezbollah and Lebanon. They discussed efforts towards de-escalation, a diplomatic resolution to hostilities. There was a lot about Lebanon in the readout. The two also discussed Biden's unprecedented support for Israel. This is officially, that's a quote that came from a White House email I got today. Mr. Sullivan reaffirmed President Biden's commitment to ensure that Israel has all it needs to defend itself militarily and to confront its Iranian-backed adversaries. They also discussed the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the need to increase the flow of humanitarian assistance. This sounds like the same conversation on repeat for 264 days. Sullivan also recognized Gallant's personal efforts and leadership to support humanitarian efforts. He also raised the importance of de-escalating tensions in the West Bank, including the transfer of clearance revenues to the Palestinian Authority without further delay. This sounded like pretty rhetoric to me. Reuters did report tonight that the U.S. and Biden administration are still holding out on that heavy bomb shipment that was put on hold at the beginning of May. That is the only weapons to date that the Biden administration, to my knowledge, has withheld from Israel. According to Reuters, the issue is under review. A White House official said the U.S. and Israel remain in discussions about the single shipment of powerful munitions, which was paused by Biden in May over concerns that they could cause more Palestinian civilian deaths. More Palestinians died in Gaza today. Apparently also at the Gallant meetings at the White House, Gallant said that at the start of the meeting, the security advisor Sullivan said that Israel and the U.S. have the same goals in the war in Gaza. May I just say, Lord have mercy, I hope that's not true, but that's what he said, adding that even when we disagree on the path, we've resolved it behind closed doors. After Gallant's comments, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, and apparently this was public, quote, when the disputes are not resolved for weeks behind closed doors, the Prime Minister of Israel needs to speak openly in order to bring what the soldiers need. And that's what has happened this time too, end quote. That was in Haaretz today. There was a scandalous op-ed in the New York Times where key Israeli public officials, including former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, ex-Mossad chief Perdo, and the author David Grossman, penned this op-ed calling on the United States Congress to withdraw the invitation for Netanyahu to speak at the end of July. July 24th is that date. Mr. Netanyahu's appearance in Washington will not represent the state of Israel and its citizens, and it will reward his scandalous and destructive conduct towards our country, they said. Gallant urged his counterpart during his visit here, Lloyd Austin, our Secretary of Defense, to help Israel in its endeavor to stop a nuclear Iran. He stressed that time is running out. I'll just note that I did not see anything in the news about any protests in terms of Gallant's visit. I think in large part it was under the radar, and I did not see anything about that. Wall Street Journal reported the reason U.S. arms shipments to Israel have been slower over the past months is that the government of Israel has put in fewer new requests. To U.S. officials have said. In Israel, there have been debates over past weeks about the Army service for the ultra-Orthodox, which ultimately, passed. And despite early indications that the Israeli High Court's landmark ruling on the recruitment of ultra-Orthodox, one of those groups is called Haredi, men into the IDF, would not immediately cause a coalition crisis, recent statements by politicians and a letter from the Israel Attorney General to the government have fueled tension with Haredi leadership that could lead to early elections soon. In immediate reactions, Haredi leaders expressed outrage, but didn't threaten to leave the coalition over the court order, as it appeared to give the government leeway to begin recruiting low numbers and didn't force it to do so immediately. So just for you to know, in terms of Netanyahu's coalition, it will only take 2 more leaders leaving for the coalition to fall. So if the ultra-Orthodox conscription, it does have the possibility and potential to be a turning point issue. After the ruling, a Likud party member said there's 64,000 yeshiva students who are exempt for recruitment. And in each recruitment round, there's about 15 to 16,000 who have to be recruited. And so he said half would eventually be recruited of those yeshiva students, which is a non-starter for the Haredi leadership. Haredi is a branch of ultra-Orthodox Judaism in Israel. He said this year we need to recruit 3,000 ultra-Orthodox. It must happen. The law guarantees it. I say it in the clearest way. I will not give up significant recruiting for the ultra-Orthodox in favor of what the IDF needs. Today in Israel, hundreds of people, including hostage family members, demonstrated as a part of a national day of protest across Israel. The main demonstration is scheduled for Wednesday evening in Tel Aviv. And it's important to note that in the US, Gaza and Israel are influencing US electoral politics. Jamal Bowman of New York, who has been one of Congress's most outspoken progressives, he's a representative. He suffered, this is a direct quote, I believe from the New York Times, a stinging primary defeat on Tuesday. This was actually reported by the Associated Press, unable to overcome a record-shattering campaign from pro-Israel groups and a slate of self-inflicted blunders. According to reports, Bowman has been one of the leading critics of how Israelis have been carrying out their war with Hamas, but the contest grew into a broader proxy fight around the future of the Democratic Party, exposing painful fractures around race, class, ideology in a diverse district. Jamal Bowman was the district's first Black congressman, a committed democratic socialist, never wavered on his calls for a ceasefire in Gaza and left-wing economic priorities. Down to the polls, he repeatedly accused his white opponents of racism and used expletives in denouncing the pro-Israel groups as a Zionist regime trying to buy the election. It's been said that AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby, was significantly behind his defeat and put in huge amounts of money backing his opponent. In other news, Qatar has not asked Hamas leadership residing in Doha to leave as a pressure tactic to force them to accept the hostage deal. That was reported in Jerusalem Post. Hamas leaders in Doha believe the Biden administration will increase pressure on Israel to reach a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal only once the IDF withdraws from Rafah. That's according to a Palestinian official. Sarah Netanyahu, I mentioned this yesterday, the wife of the prime minister, accused IDF of a coup against her husband while meeting hostage families. But following those statements, she clarified that her remarks were not aimed at the IDF, but just at a few senior commanders. And according to the Times of Israel, the former prime minister, Naftali Bennett, said yesterday, or today actually, that October 7th was an epic, colossal failure for the state of Israel. He was speaking at Tel Aviv University. He said, "We failed in intelligence and operations. For a month after the attacks, institutional Israel, almost all government ministries melted down. Education, welfare, finance, nothing worked." According to Israeli news, Egypt has rejected a proposal by Israel to allow Palestinians in need of medical treatment to exit through Kerem Shalom. The Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese news agency Al Akbar reported on Tuesday morning. I thought maybe that was a typo, and maybe they meant not through Kerem Shalom, maybe they meant through the Rafah crossing, but that was a direct quote from the news. But according to the report, it said that Egypt refused because they think Palestinians should control the crossing, which made me think that they're speaking of the Rafah crossing. This is 264 days in. Gaza residents reported fierce fighting overnight into Wednesday between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters in Rafah. The IDF continues to operate all across Gaza. Medics in Gaza said that later today, Wednesday, an Israeli strike killed 3 Palestinians and wounded others in Jabalia. The Nuseirat camp in central Gaza, tank shells struck an apartment where at least 5 people were killed. The death toll as of today in Gaza is 37,718 Palestinians killed and at least 86,377 wounded since October 7th. We also continue to call for the release of hostages held in Gaza, of which it is unknown how many are still alive. But we stand with our Jewish friends in calling for the release of those hostages, and with Palestinians who are calling for the release of prisoners who have been held so unjustly in Israeli prisons, often without charges and without any due process. This week, Save the Children issued a report called Gaza's Missing Children, which stated over 20,000 children have estimated to be lost, disappeared, detained, or buried under the rubble or in mass graves. It is nearly impossible to collect and verify information under the current conditions in Gaza, but at least 17,000 children are believed to be unaccompanied, separated. Approximately 4,000 children are likely missing under the rubble, with an unknown number in mass graves. Others have forcibly disappeared, including an unknown number detained and forcibly transferred out of Gaza, their whereabouts unknown to their families amidst reports of ill treatment and torture. Pray for the children of Gaza, those who are missing, those who are lost, those whose lives have been taken thus far too soon, those whose parents remain, who have been left behind, who are still living, or who are at least trying to live in the abject poverty and conditions that exist in Gaza today. Pray for the children of Israel and for all of the children in the Middle East, that they might have a future that is not defined by war, violence, hatred, death, and destruction, that we would advocate for a way out of this disaster, ethnic cleansing, the genocide in Gaza, that we would bring an end to the oppression and occupation of the Palestinian people, while also finding a way for the safety and security of all people. That's my hope and my prayer, that by the grace of God, we would continue to work toward that end. Amen.